Hey there, how's it going everybody? In this video, we're going to be using Python and the YouTube API to access a user's account. So far, we've only been using public information on YouTube by accessing public playlists, public videos, and things like that. But you might want to access some private user data, such as a user's likes or comments, or even allow a user to modify their account in some way through Python, such as allowing them to upload a video, like videos, comment, or whatever else we're able to do through the API. So to do this, we're going to need to use a better authentication protocol than the API keys that we've currently been using. So we're going to need to update our scripts to use OAuth instead. So OAuth 2 will allow you or your users to give our scripts and applications limited access to third-party accounts. And that third-party account or application in this video is going to be YouTube. You've likely seen something like this in applications before. So for example, if you've used Instagram, then you probably have noticed that Instagram also gives you the option to automatically post photos to Twitter or Facebook. Now, if you did choose to post to Twitter, then Instagram would open up a page to log into your Twitter account, and it would say something like, Instagram would like to be able to post a tweet on your behalf. Please log in to allow Instagram access to your Twitter account. That is basically what OAuth is. So for example, I'm currently using this on YouTube to grab a list of my YouTube members so that I can add them and my patrons to credits at the end of my videos. So in this video, I'm going to give my Python script access to my YouTube channel using OAuth, and then I'll just do something simple like list my private or unlisted videos. I think my latest unlisted video is one of me as like a kid back in 1992 or something like that. So if you stick around to the end of the video, then you'll get to see that. Now, if you haven't watched my video on getting started with the YouTube API using Python, then definitely watch that video first, because that's where I show the basics of the YouTube API and how to connect to different services. And I'm using the script that we ended with in that video as a starting point. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, I'm just going to do a very simple example where I use OAuth to access my uploaded videos. But first, let's see what this looks like without OAuth so that you can see what it looks like just using an API key. So to grab my uploaded videos, one way that we can do this is first, instead of accessing my channel statistics like we did in that getting started video, I'm instead going to access content details, and this will print out some details from my channel. And if I run this, then there's one part down here that says related playlists. Now, if we look at our related playlist, we can see that we have one here called uploads. So that is a playlist of all of my uploads, and this is that playlist ID. So I'm going to grab that playlist ID. And now let's print out all of my videos from that playlist. Or actually, it'll just be the first 5 videos of the playlist. So in order to do this, instead of accessing the channels resource here, I'm instead going to change this to playlist items. And I'm still going to list these. Now let's grab the status of these playlist items. And I can just remove this for username here. And instead, I'm going to type in playlist ID and paste that playlist ID that we got before. Now that D in ID is lowercase. Sometimes I've accidentally made that uppercase instead. So now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and run our code. And now we can see that we get back some information here for the first 5 videos of this playlist. And we can take a look at the status here. We can see that the privacy status of these videos are public. So these are my latest public videos. But one thing I wanted to show here was down here at the bottom where it says page info, total results is 229. So we can see that using an API key, that just gives us public data. And it's telling me that I have 229 video uploads. When I release this video, it'll be 230 public videos. But these are all public. If I wanted to also view my private or unlisted videos, then I would need to give my script permission to view my YouTube account's data. So to do this, we're going to need to create an OAuth client. So in order to create this, we're going to open up our Google Developers Console that we've used in previous videos. And I already have mine open here in the browser. So to create a new OAuth client, I am just going to go here to Credentials. And now I don't have any API keys here. That's because I created a new project so that we could see what this looks like from scratch. What I was using for that first example was an API key from a different project. So if you were confused about that, then that's why. So in order to create an OAuth client, we can click up here on Create Credentials. Now, instead of an API key, we're going to create an OAuth client ID. Now, if this is the first OAuth client ID that you've created, then you're going to have this screen here that says that you need to configure a consent screen. Now, if you've already walked through this once, then you won't see this. But if it's the first time, then let's go ahead and walk through this. So first, we have to configure a user type. So I'm going to choose external here because that is available to any user with a Google account. Internal is for like G Suite users and things like that for internal applications. But most of the time we're going to be making external user types here. So let me click on create. And now I got an error here. I've been having some issues with their site today. Hopefully that won't affect what we're doing here. But now all I'm going to do on this OAuth consent screen is I'm just going to put in an application name, and then we'll take care of everything else later, like the scopes and things like that. So I'm just going to set my application name to YouTube API. So now down here at the bottom, I will click on save. And once that is saved, then we should be able to go back here to our credentials. And now let's try this again, where we click on Create Credentials and then OAuth Client ID. And now that we've set up that consent screen, now we can move forward with creating our client ID. Now, when you get to this screen here, it's going to ask you what type of application that we'll be using for our OAuth keys. Now, so far in this series of videos, I've only been using Python scripts, but a simple script isn't listed here in any of the application types. Now, there are several ways that we could set this up, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose web application. Now, that might be confusing, but basically what this means is that I'm going to run a local web server that allows me to log into my Google account and give my script access to my private YouTube data. Now, this doesn't have to be a local web server. If you created a web application that allowed people to log into their Google accounts, then you would select this option as well. And perhaps in the future, I can show how to do this with Flask or Django so that we could set up that functionality on an actual real website. Now, if running a local web server sounds confusing, then don't worry because we're going to be using a Google library that makes all of this very easy for us to use. Okay, so now that I've selected this application type, now I'm just going to name this. So I'll just name this YouTube API app. And now down here, we do need to select a redirect URI. And I'll explain more about this in just a minute. Now, since I'm going to be doing this locally, I can just do http:// I'll do localhost, and let's run this on port 8080. Okay, and again, I'll explain more about this in just a bit. So now let's go ahead and create our application here. Okay, and once we create those OAuth credentials, it's going to display our client ID and our client secret. Now, unlike our API key, I'm not going to copy and paste these into my script. Instead, I'm going to use the option that Google gives us to download all of these credentials to a single file, and that's going to make things a lot easier for us to get authorized later on. So I'm just going to say OK here, and now here with my client IDs, I'm going to click this download button here, and it's going to download all of this to a client secret.json file. Now, this file is going to have a big, long, random name, but I'm going to go to our downloads folder here, and I'm just going to, let me make this a little larger here so we can see. I'm just going to rename this to client secrets.json instead of this big, long, random name. Okay, so client secrets.json. And now I'm going to move this JSON file into the directory of our script. So I also have that open here in my Finder. So I'm going to drag this client secrets.json into the same directory as my Python script. So now I can close these windows down. Okay, so now that we have those client secrets, now we can change our script so that this is working with OAuth instead of just our API key. But we're going to make this process a bit easier by installing some Google authorization libraries that will handle a lot of the authorization for us. This will also handle the process of running a local web server and everything like that. So it makes the entire process a lot easier. And we can install these just by using pip. So I'm going to open my terminal here, and now let's install those libraries. So this is pip install, and one is called Google Auth. So let's run that. And now let's also pip install Google Auth dash OAuth lib. So let's install this as well. Okay. Okay, so now that we have those libraries installed, now let's modify our script so that we can authenticate with OAuth. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to import the authorization classes, and I'll need these from the libraries that we just installed. So first, I'm going to say from Google _auth OAuth lib dot flow, I want to import installed app flow. And I'm also going to import this request class that it uses to make web requests. So I'm going to say from google.auth.transport.request import, and this is called request. Okay, and now we're not going to be using this API key anymore. So instead, let's load in all of our OAuth credentials from that client secrets JSON file that we moved to the same directory as our script. So to do this, this is going to be a flow object. So we are going to take this installed app flow class that we just imported, and this has a method called from _ clients _ secrets _ file, and this file was called client, whoops, let me spell this correctly, client secrets.json. Okay, so this line here is going to load in all of our credentials. Now, one more thing that we need to add in when working with OAuth is the scope of the information our script can access. And when we set the scope, then when I allow my script to access my YouTube account, it will tell me something like, this script would like to view your YouTube account. And if we actually wanted to make modifications to our account or view different information, then we would need to tell our script exactly what scopes our script will be accessing so that it tells the end user exactly what they're agreeing to when they allow our script access to their account. So if you want to view all of the scopes, then I have this page open here in my browser as well, and it breaks down a little bit more what these scopes do. So we can see here that this scope allows us to manage our YouTube account. This one is to see all active channel members. That's one that I'm using for my private script. And then there are a few other ones here. Now, the one that we're going to be using is this YouTube read only, because we're not going to be making any changes to our script. We're just going to be viewing information about my account. But based on what you're doing with your application, you're going to have to choose different scopes. So I'm going to copy this URL here. And now let's go back to our script. And now we need to also add our scopes into this installed app flow here. So I'm just going to go to the next line, and I'm going to say that the scopes are equal to, and this will be a list, but the list is just going to contain that read-only scope. Now, if you wanted to add additional scopes here, then this is where you would do it. Okay, so that should be everything that we need in terms of our credentials, but now we need to run our local web server so that we can log into our Google account and allow our script access to our data. And this flow object that we just created will do all of this for us. So to do this, we can just go down another line here, and I'm going to use this flow object that we just created and say flow flow.run_local_server. So run local server. And also, if you remember, whenever I specified that the URL for our redirect URIs, I said that it was localhost on port 8080. So I'm going to say port 8080 here on my local server. Now, I'm also going to add one more argument here. Now, this might actually not be necessary, but I ran into an issue where I wasn't getting all of the tokens back that I expected, and I found this solution online. Basically, I wasn't getting a refresh token, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. But I think what was happening is that I was getting a refresh token for the first time I was running it, but since I was testing and running it multiple times, it wasn't giving me a refresh token every single time. So the solution that I found online for this was to pass in prompt of consent, and that should make this give me a refresh token every time I run this, even when I'm testing. And like I said, I'll explain more about these tokens in just a bit. But basically, once we get authorized with our Google account, we're going to receive several tokens. And one of these is called an access token, and another is a refresh token. Now, these access tokens have a short lifespan and will expire shortly after they're issued. Now, the refresh tokens last much longer, and you can use them to fetch new access tokens for accessing your data. And the issue that I was running into, like I said, is that I was testing these routes. And when you do that, it might not send a new refresh token every time. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. And like I said, I'll talk more about those tokens in just a bit. Now, when we reach this line of our Python script, then Google is going to run a local web server for us and open up a page for us to log into our Google account. And once we log in and are properly authorized, then it's going to set our credentials within this flow object. Now we can grab those credentials simply by accessing flow.credentials. So I'm going to create a variable here called credentials, and these will be set in flow.credentials, okay? And that credentials object that's returned has a method called toJSON. That will allow us to print these out in JSON format. So let's do that just so we can make sure everything is working so far. So I'm going to print out these credentials. And like I said, this credentials object has a method called toJSON. Now let me comment out everything below here for now so that we can make sure that everything is working so far. So I'm going to comment out everything down here at the bottom. So I'm not actually going to use these credentials to connect to the YouTube service yet. Right now, we're just going to make sure that we are getting all of our authentication taken care of here with what we have so far. So let me run this. Okay, so I got an error here that installed AppFlow has no attributes from client's secrets file. This is actually from client secrets file. Sorry for that typo. So hopefully that's the only typo I made. Let's try this again. Okay, so now when I run this, we can see that it automatically opens up my web browser and brings me to this page here. So let me make this just a little larger. So now it's saying, okay, what account do you want to log in with? So I'm going to log in with my main account here. And when I click on this, it's going to say which account or brand do you want to use. I have 2 YouTube channels, but I'm just going to click my main YouTube channel here that you all are mostly familiar with. Now, this screen will pop up here saying that this app isn't verified. That's because, we're just using a local script, but we know that we can trust this because we wrote the script. Now, if somebody else wrote the script and they're trying to get access to your YouTube information or any other information for that matter, then you probably won't want to give them access. But we know that we wrote this script and that it's safe, so I can click on Show Advanced here and then go to the YouTube API. So now this is the scope here. It's saying that this script wants to view your YouTube account. So even if it was a nefarious application, all that they would be able to do with this scope is view your YouTube data. They wouldn't be able to make any changes to your account. And you always want to use as little scopes or as few scopes as possible. You only want, you don't want to scare people away. You just want to access only the information that you need. So I'm going to say that I want to allow this script to view my YouTube information. So I'll allow that. It's going to ask to confirm. So I'll allow that again. And now it automatically redirects me to this page here that says the authentication flow has completed. You may close this window. So I'm going to close this, go back to our script. And if you remember, we printed out our credentials.to.json here. And these are our credentials. Now, whenever it runs the local server, it prints out this prompt here that says to authorize your application, please visit this URL. So that is all this part here. Our actual credentials are this bottom half here. So just so that we can see these a little bit better, let me copy these and go to a new window here. And let me run this JSON pretty print here so that we can see these a little bit better. Now, one more thing before we look at these credentials. Now, I don't really need that output there that said, to authorize your application, please visit this URL. I don't want that printed out within my Python script. If you don't want that, one thing that you can do here in your run local server method is that you can add this authorization. Let's see, I think it's authorization underscore prompt underscore message. And I'm just going to set that to an empty string. Sorry, having trouble typing here. So authorization prompt message, set that to an empty string, and you won't see that big, long prompt anymore. So now let's go back here to our credentials. And now let me take a second to describe a little bit more of what's actually going on here so far with our flow object and what this is actually doing in the background. So when it runs this local web server here, it's using our client ID and our client secret that we get from our client secrets JSON file. And it's using that to go to an authorization URL. Now that authorization URL is where we log in and give our application access to the scopes that we listed within this method as well. Now, like I said, in this case, I'm giving access for my app to have read-only access to my YouTube account. And then after we successfully log in, then Google sends us back something called an authentication code. And then automatically in the background, Google is exchanging this authentication code for an access token and a refresh token. And like I said before, the access token is what we use to talk to the YouTube API and get the data that we're after. But the access token expires fairly quickly. So we should set up our application so that it automatically checks if the access token is expired. And if it is expired, then we'll simply use the refresh token to fetch a new one instead of going through that entire login process again. There are probably a few different ways that we could do this, but I'll show you how I've personally been doing this. So with that said, we can see that in our credentials here, we have a token. This is that access token. Then we have our refresh token, the token URI, client ID, client secret, and scopes, just like we talked about before. Now, if that doesn't make sense, let me really quick pause the video and go find a visual of what's going on, and that might make a bit more sense. Okay, so I know that what I said earlier was probably a little confusing. This stuff was confusing for me the first couple of times that I did this as well. So here's an actual visual of what's going on in the background, just so you can be sure that you know what's going on when we request these tokens. So first, what we're doing is that we are requesting a token. That is, and then our flow object in the background will run that local web server and go out to the Google servers here. And that's where we have this user login and consent. That's whenever I actually logged into my YouTube account and allowed my script access to my YouTube data. And then this sends back an authorization code to the user. And using that flow object, this is all done automatically. You can also do this manually if you want using HTTP requests. But what Google did automatically for us using that flow object was that it exchanged our authorization code for tokens. So that is this part here. And then we got a token response from the Google servers. That is the access token and the refresh token. And we use those tokens to call the Google API. And that is what we're going to do now that we have these access tokens and refresh tokens. Okay, I just wanted to be clear with that. So now that we've gone over that again, let's actually use these tokens to access our YouTube account. Now, like I said, I'm going to set up our application so that it automatically checks if the access token is expired. And if it is expired, then I'm simply going to use the refresh token to fetch a new one instead of going through that entire login process again. So the way that I'm going to do this is that I'm going to be saving our credentials into a file using Pickle. Now, if you don't know what Pickle is, basically it's a way for us to save Python objects in a file as bytes and then load those objects back into Python using that file. Now, if you've never used it before, then don't worry too much about it. It's almost exactly like working with a regular file. So I'm going to import a couple of modules for this. So up here at the top, we're going to need the OS package, which we already have imported. And also I'm going to import Pickle. And now what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to initialize our credits variable at the top of our script. And I'm going to set these equal to none. So let me cut these out and paste these in up here. And I'm going to initialize these to none. And then we're going to go through some conditionals to check if our credentials already exist. And if they don't, then we will go through this login process. Okay, so now let's imagine how we want the flow of our application to go when we actually run this script. So first, we want to check if we already have some credentials saved in a Pickle file. If we do, then we want to load those credentials in. Now, I'm going to copy and paste some snippets that I have here since I'm kind of a slow typer and also I make a lot of typos like you guys have probably seen. But after I paste these snippets in, I'm going to walk over everything that we're doing. And also I have a link to these snippets in the description section below if anybody would like to follow along. Okay, so the first snippet that I'm going to grab here is going to be where we are checking if a Pickle file already exists. So right below our credentials here, I'm just going to paste this in. And now let me walk over what this snippet is doing. So we are saying, okay, do we have a file in the current directory called token.pickle? If we do, then print out that I'm loading in credentials from my Pickle file. So then we are opening this Pickle file. Now this is read bytes since this is a bytes file and not just a regular text file. So I'm going to open that file and I'm going to call that token. And then we are doing credentials is equal to pickle.load and load in that token. So that is how you load in information from Pickle. Like I said, it's very similar to working with a regular file, but you just have to use this pickle.load here and also open this up as bytes. Okay, so at this point in our script here, where we check if this exists, if we already had some credentials saved, then this conditional here will load in those credentials. But if that Pickle file didn't exist, then our credentials would still be set to none. So we're going to want to check if that credentials variable is still none. And even if those credentials were loaded in, we're also going to want to check if they're still valid. So let me grab the next snippet and walk through everything in detail there. Now here I have a snippet that we need to import that request. I think we already have that. Yeah, we already have that here, so I don't need to use this snippet here. The one that I want is checking if our credentials were loaded in and if they are valid. So let me copy these and then I will explain what we're doing here. So right after that conditional where we're checking if that Pickle file exists with our current credentials, I'm going to just overwrite all of the code that we currently have now all the way up into my comments here. So I'm going to paste this in, and let's scroll back over here. Okay, so now let me explain what these are doing here. So here's the part where we load in our credentials if they already exist. So now we're saying if those credentials don't exist, or if those credentials are not valid, then we want to come inside of this conditional here. And within this conditional, there are two things that we want to do. We first want to check if our credentials actually exist. So if we have credentials, which means that they were actually loaded in from the Pickle file, and if those credentials are expired, and if we have a refresh token, then we want to refresh our access token using that refresh token. And we can do that simply with credentials.refresh and then pass in that Google request class that we imported up here at the top. And I also made a print statement here just so that we can see that within our file that we are refreshing our access token. Now, if we don't hit this conditional, then it means that we don't have credentials, or that we don't have a refresh token or something like that. In that case, what we want to do is just do everything that we did before, where we fetch new tokens. And that is what we have done in this video previously up to this point. We're using that installed app flow from client secrets file, using that client secrets.json, passing in the correct scope, which in my case is YouTube read only. I am running my local web server, and in my case, it's on port 8080. And then we are setting our credentials equal to those flow credentials after we are properly authenticated and the user logs into their YouTube account. And now that we have those credentials, I want to save those to a Pickle file so that the next time we run this script, we don't have to go through this entire login process again. So to save this using Pickle, we can just open up a file using write byte mode, and then I can just say pickle.dump credentials into that file. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but like I said, I am going to have these snippets available in the description section below. If anybody wants to follow along with these, I'll have those available so that you can copy and paste. Okay, so now that we have all of this in place, let's go ahead and run this and make sure that everything's working correctly. And if it looks like it's working how it should, then we'll finally connect to the YouTube service using these OAuth credentials and see if we can see my unlisted videos. So let's run this and make sure that these snippets that I pasted in are currently working. Now, I don't currently have a credentials Pickle file here, so I'll probably have to log in again. So this is the process that we saw before. I'm going to choose my YouTube account that I want to give access to. I'm going to say that I trust my script, allow access, and then it says authentication has completed. You may close this window. So I will close that, open that script back up, and we can see everything that we printed out here. So I said fetching new tokens, saving credentials for future use. Now, I know that this is probably going to be hard to see in my sidebar here, but I do have a token.pickle file here. Now, like I said, this is bytes, so this is just going to be a bunch of gibberish. But whenever we load that back in, Python is going to know what to do with that. So now that we have our credentials saved in this token.pickle file, if I run this again, then it shouldn't need to open up a browser and make us go through that entire login process again. It should just be able to use that Pickle file with our existing credentials. So let me run this again and see what happens. So we can see that when I ran this, it simply says loading credentials from file. So that means that it loaded in, and whenever we hit this conditional here, apparently our credentials weren't expired, and we didn't have to go through our entire login process again. So that's good. Okay, so that should be everything that we need to do for our credentials. So now let's finally use these credentials to connect to the YouTube API and list out my videos. So I'm going to go down here and uncomment out my code from before where we connected to this YouTube service. Now, we actually don't need to change much here, but one thing that we do need to change is that we are no longer using this API key, or what YouTube has this argument is called developer key. So instead of passing in an API key, I'm instead going to change this so that we're passing in our new credentials. And all we need to do is change this parameter and this argument to credentials. So I'm going to say credentials is equal to credentials. So let's save that. And now if I run this using those new credentials, then let's look what we have here. So we can see that it loaded those in from a file. And now whenever we look at the videos that I get back from my account, the first video that I have here, this is a privacy status of unlisted. So it is seeing my unlisted videos. And if I go down to the bottom here, now I can see that the page info, the total results is 236. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the video, when we made a public request to my channel, we were getting 229 videos. So we're seeing more videos, and that's because I have about 7 that are private or unlisted. Now, let's see if we can list out the URL of an unlisted video. Now, I could loop through all of my videos like we've done in previous videos, but I'd like to keep my other videos actually private. So I'm just going to grab my first unlisted video that I uploaded not long ago. So first, let me loop over the first 5 videos here and make sure that I actually have this unlisted video here. Now, we've actually already seen this, but what I'm going to do here is instead of printing out this response, I'm going to say for item in response, and I'm going to access the items here that were returned. And then I'm just going to print out each of those items. And each of these, in this case, should be a video. So I'm going to run this. And now each of these should be a video. And we can see here that the latest video here is unlisted. And now let's grab the video ID of this video. With the video ID, we'll be able to create a YouTube link. So in order to get the video ID, up here where we make our request, oops, I went up a little bit too far here. Up here where we make this request right here, for the part, we don't only want the status, we also want the content details. So I'm going to save that and run it. And now for each video, let me go up to the top one here. That was the unlisted video. So that is right here. We can see that we have a video ID. And with these video IDs, we can actually create a YouTube link. So what I'm going to do here is I'm only going to print out the video IDs of these videos. So to do this, we can see here that we have content details, and then within that is video ID. And this is all dictionaries here. So up here, when we print out our item, I'm just going to access both of those. So I'm going to say content details. So I want to access that key of each item. And then I also want to access the video ID within those content details. So I'm going to save that and run it. And now we're just getting the video IDs for each of those. Now, if you want to create a YouTube link using the video ID, then we can simply do this. So first, let me capture this into a variable. So I'll call this vid underscore ID. And to create a YouTube link, I can say YouTube link is equal to, I'm going to do an F string here. And this is what YouTube links to videos look like. So I'll say https://, and this will be a shorthand link. So a shorthand link on YouTube is u2.be and then /, and then the video ID. So since we're using an F string, I'm just going to paste that in there dynamically like that. And now let's print out these full YouTube links. So I'll print these out. And so now I have a YouTube link here. So now let me paste this into my browser and make sure that this worked. So if I paste this, Sorry, hopefully my sound is off. Let me mute this. Oh, let me mute that. Okay, so that is an unlisted video. That's a private video that is on my channel. And let me go ahead and pause this as well. So if you're interested in watching one of my old home videos that I had unlisted on my channel, then you can type in that URL and check that out if you'd like. It's an unlisted video, which means that it's not private, but anybody with the URL can actually watch it. But I'm not going to play the whole thing here because I assume that most of you are more interested in the YouTube API and not my home videos. So now that we made sure that that worked and that we did get a link to our unlisted video here. Let me go back to the script. Okay, so that actually worked. We can see that this entire process here, which I know is a lot of code, but most of this is just checking credentials and things like that so that we don't have to log in every time. But we were able to log in using OAuth to log into our YouTube account and give our script access to some private user data. And in this video, we only saw that I could see my unlisted videos, but there's so much more that we can do with this. Some apps use this to run analytics for YouTube channels and give them tips for how they can improve their performance. I could use this concept to write an app so that I could use a Python script to update my YouTube descriptions, upload videos, change thumbnails, or really anything that we'd like to do. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm actually using this same process right now to grab my YouTube members with a Python script so that I can automatically create some credits to the end of each video. And I did finally get this working with YouTube. So now at the end of each video, I now have my Patreon and YouTube contributors listed. And you'll see those at the end of this video in just a bit. But with that said, I think that's going to do it for this video. I hope you feel like you got a better understanding of the process of connecting to an API using OAuth. Even if you're not using the YouTube API, the OAuth process will likely look like this for most applications. And we'll probably see this in future videos when I use Python with Twitter and Reddit and things like that. Now, in this video, we saw an example using my local machine, but you could also have this same functionality on a web page or an app where users allow access to their private information for a specific reason. So like I said at the beginning of the video, this would be similar to Instagram having you log into your Twitter and allowing them to post photos to your Twitter automatically on your behalf each time you post a picture to Instagram. So something like that is a good example of where you would use something like this. So if you find this kind of video useful, then maybe I can make some future Flask or Django videos where we do some OAuth stuff like this on an actual web page. But if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon or YouTube, and there are links to those pages in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.